Tonight's presenter is a young man that I met a little over, I guess, almost 2 years ago now. His name is Lamont Turner. I'm sure most of you have had a chance to read his bio on the announcement. I'm going to briefly go through it, and I want to make a couple of remarks. And let me just, at the risk of being repetitive, Mr. Turner serves as the director of Franklin's Charge, a nonprofit organization focused on preserving America's threatened Civil War battlefields in Williamson County, Tennessee. Mr. Turner chaired the enslaved Markham Memorial unveiling at the Carnton Plantation in McGavick Cemetery. He serves as a director of the public nonprofit organization focused on promoting anti-racism through education, advocacy, and action. And I think that's some really important work. Mr. Turner is the author of a winning Beyond the Scoreboard as the underdog. The final score is what counts. Mr. Turner will be releasing a book in 2021 on how the South can heal its Civil War wound of white supremacy in 2021. Mr. Turner is a Franklin, Tennessee native who graduated from Battleground Academy High School. He later graduated from Vanderbilt University in 3 years with a BS in Human Organization Development. He spent the last 20 years as a medical sales consultant. Mr. Turner wants to help Tennesseans heal by recovering the truth about Tennessee's violent racial past. And in his most recent, in one of his most recent, at least that I know about, endeavors, Mr. Turner is also the president of the Tennesseans for Historical Justice. And I will share with you, I'm a member of that organization also, but that is a statewide organization doing work somewhat similar to what we do in Lynching Sites Project, but it is focused on statewide confronting and discovering the truth about cold cases that occurred in Tennessee and what all this legacy means. So there's a great deal of work that we are doing, that he is doing with Tennesseans for Historical Justice. In fact, I think he's probably given us a new shot of adrenaline, and we are very focused and moving forward on that. And let me just come back. I mentioned that he is the author of a book, Winning Beyond the Scoreboard. Well, I'll also share with you, in addition to graduating Vanderbilt in 3 years' time, he also went out for pro football. So he's a very, very talented individual, and I certainly enjoy talking with him. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Lamont Turner. Lamont, welcome to the Lynching Sites Project of Memphis. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, John. I just want to confirm, can you hear me and can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to minimize this here, and let me see. Let me go right here, do this. Great, I think I'm good to go. So again, thank you, John, for that introduction, and it's been a pleasure knowing you as well. Just to kind of recap on why I'm here today. If I recall correctly, John forwarded this article that I wrote here as an extension of my blog. Will Franklin's fuller story heal its open Civil War wound? And just a little bit about me. My name is Lamont Turner. I am a transcultural strategist, meaning I create strategies to help people go from one culture to the next very fluidly. I help students cope with America's true racial history so that they can adjust to America's demographic shift, as well as the cancel culture shift that's going on as well. So for over 4 decades, I've studied the differences between different cultures. I have an immigrant wife. She's from Dominican Republic. I've written 2 books, as he said, and as he said, I am the president of Tennesseans for Historical Justice, as well as Geonic Strategies. So my goal tonight is to share my different perspective, and I also hope to stimulate your consciousness. And I hope to demonstrate the transformative power of true history. And simply, I just want to encourage you to keep on doing what you're doing. So as John said, I've been blessed to be not only a president of Tennesseans for Historical Justice, Geonic Strategies, but he asked me to also talk about the momentum that we've created in Franklin. We've been asked to talk on stages, talk to students, hold politicians accountable, and we've also partnered up to help other community members advance our cause and work. Here recently, we've had school board districts try to reform their racial policies. Parents have been engaged like they never have before. We have in Franklin Rebels, the mascot is being changed, or it has been changed, to the admirals now. Our county seal right now, this Confederate logo that you see there, that's being changed right now. I was asked to kind of contribute to that. And so it's advancing now as far as they recommended to remove the Confederate flag. So we have a lot of momentum going on here. I was also fortunate to chair the unveiling here in Franklin at Carson Plantation. It was a city-wide led effort and initiative. You took one demographic, the neo-Confederates, if you will, and the enslaved descendants, and we all came together at one moment. They were wondering, could we do it? We had a great celebratory event there, celebrating our past and our true history. With that, we actually expanded the narrative. Previously, the Carson Plantation signs only had Confederate cemetery. Now we have the Confederate and enslaved cemeteries. So before they even get to the Carson Plantation, we've already expanded their mind to open up and be receptive of this new narrative to advance, the future and the future narrative. In Franklin, we got a chance to expand the narrative. I showed you that. We're expanding relationships. Like I said, I wrote a book from my blog. I expanded my second book. John mentioned that, Cornerstone Community, How Southerners Can Heal by Transforming Lives, Hearts, and Minds and Culture. So from my first blog, I spoke and I expanded again relationships, but this is my first blog right here. And we went from a blog to an article, and that's where all that momentum started for me. But again, it's about the fuller story. So the fuller story in and of itself is about an expansion of the Confederate narrative to something larger, to be more inclusive of the African-American story. And as you'll see here, they tried to talk about the Battle of Franklin there, as well as the colored troops who helped get the Union victory. Then they wanted to talk about Reconstruction there. And then they wanted to talk about the riot to expose some of the challenges with the racist relations. And then we're going to add in the summer, Juneteenth, a colored troop soldier statue there. So I commended the Fuller Story founders. However, what I was concerned with was the narrative here, which says Franklin Group to soon unveil new African-American heritage history signs. My whole concern with that was, this is all of our history, not just African-American history. And please, tell the whole story. So that's what I kind of want to hear. And another concern I had was, at this time we had a debate going on whose property is the downtown center land there. Is it the UDC's? Is it Franklin's? And that was a whole nother issue. And so what ended up happening long term, they ended up giving that land away. But I'm going to talk about the process that it took to kind of get there. So I started asking the question, hey, you're talking about the African-American heritage story, or our story, but what about the guy in the center, the elephant in the room? Why don't you explain that? And in doing that, asking that conscious question, people started looking at me like, what you talking about, Willis? And they didn't want to talk about it. They just kind of kept skipping over it. And so I said, yeah, there is more to the story. Because again, they kept coming out with articles talking about it's an African-American heritage story. So I wrote another article, the fuller story needs a broader narrative. In that article, I talked about how there's a fuller story that counters the fuller story that you all have. That's an American story there, and it needs to be shared as well. That counters the lost cause infatuation. And stuff like the Cornerstone speech, talking about the United Daughters of the Confederations. What was their intent? And then I asked them about, were they true heroes or were they traitors? And why did their Confederate leaders say and mention that they don't need to be memorialized? If we're going to educate the public, let's fully educate the public. So that's why I wrote the blog. So I said, I will pour the more if you want, because they only wanted to go to this level here, the fuller story, which was there's no ownership in that. There's no education. So that's why I wrote the blog here. And I asked the question, is there an appetite for a fuller story or a truer story in downtown Franklin? And as you'll see here, the goal that they had was to defend Chip.
And they removed him. So then there's the idea, there's a difference, I think, between monuments to individual people and monuments to collective groups. And right here in Franklin, I was involved with several pastors in an effort, we called it the Fuller Story, because we saw, for example, in Charlottesville, this huge debate over Confederate monuments there. In Charlottesville, to be plain, those are monuments to Lee and to Jackson. We were concerned that there could be a threat to the monument here, and we didn't want to see that happen. So we led an effort to, in an indirect way, to defend it, to prevent any sort of debacle from unfolding that would threaten it by providing additional context. And I think that context can be used in a lot of different places. You know,
so they wanted to,
and they removed him.
They wanted to defend Chip. And again, the Confederate leaders, Robert E. Lee, said it would be wiser not to leave open the wounds of war. That's when I first started thinking, like, we have a wound in our society by having these monuments up. And even Nathan Bedford Forrest said, it is our duty to divest ourselves. If we are if that was his recommendation, as well as Robert E. Lee's, in their most seasoned wisdom after the war, why aren't we listening to them? That was my concern. Like, okay, so let me, as John said so eloquently at the beginning, there is beauty in silence. That lesson, if we just listen, there's so much that can be learned from that. So again, my desire was to heal, not only because, you know, I love my mom, I love my wife, but it's these two girls right here, my daughters. I wanted them to grow up in a Franklin that would be healthy, whole, and took the lessons learned from the past. So if no one else was going to talk about it, I was going to talk about it. And then, you know, I guess the new phrase for questioning nowadays is woke. You know, I don't really consider myself woke, but some of the Franklin citizens here, they said, one of the best stories, talking about my blog, one of the best stories I've read from a wonderful friend in Franklinite, I thought I was woke, but he made me realize I had more work to do. And another Franklin resident said, wow, never realized it, had no idea. I was born and raised in Franklin. Thanks for the real news, Lamont Turner, and sorry that it represents that terrible past. History does have a place, but I agree, not in the middle of downtown. Maybe something in Chip's place that's more representative of Franklin and its current and future values of a more diverse and loving nature. So just by questioning, you know, people will say, hey, Lamont, you're woke. Well, the truth of the matter is I haven't always been woke. Here's my backstory. Country boy from Franklin, Tennessee. Like every other boy growing up, I had my General Lee, watched the Dukes of Hazzard. Then also too, I went downtown Franklin and went to the rodeos. I left the rodeos going back home whistling Dixie. Not really knowing. I was having an unconscious allegiance to something that I didn't really even understand. So that happened oftentimes as I drove around the square, going to and fro, unconsciously building an allegiance to something, again, I didn't even understand. I even cheered on the home team, the Franklin Rebels. As I watched the Franklin Rebels proudly represent their flag, unconsciously. Even family members. This is my cousin Junior. When I shared my blog with him, he got quiet. Again, that silence that John talked about. And I listened to his silence and I said, hey, are you there? He said, yeah. He said, hey, what's my name? I said, what, Junior, right? He said, man, what's my name? I said, Robert. He said, what's my full name? I said, Robert Lee. And then that silence kicked in and I was like, wow, you talking about after General Robert E. Lee? Yes, my uncle, he's actually named Robert Lee Moore Sr. Junior asked his father, he said, Dad, I just want to know who named the name, because he told me in reading my blog, he said, you don't know how many jokes he was the brunt of in history class because his name was Robert Lee Moore. So again, all of this is happening. Even the schools, even though I cheered on the rebels, I didn't go to the rebels. I went to BGA Battleground Academy. Again, at a certain point, I realized that how consumed my city. You know, I couldn't even get away from the Franklin Rebels name. Battleground Academy is where I went. It's all centered around the war. And in the South, you know which side that they fought for and which side that they're trying to keep, you know, on the front of mind. So BGA was a predominantly white institution. Obviously, my household was predominantly black, but when I went to some of my white students' households, they never talked about race or anything like that. But my dad told me when he sent me to BGA, he said, son, I want you to know your history because they're going to know yours. And I want you to know theirs as well. But they won't tell you about this. And again, that's why I wanted the full story to be told. People need to know and stop being quiet about it. This is a bad silence, I think. But still, there's silence or lessons to be learned in that silence as well. Once again, when I went to BGA and you talked about slavery, there was that uncomfortable silence. For those of you who didn't get a chance to integrate with the other race, oftentimes when slavery came up, the other party would look at each other kind of like that. Like, was it really that bad? Well, yeah, it was. You reach a point in the maturation of yourself, you realize it was about the whip, it was about the chains. Let's just talk about it. And that's where I was with the blog. Because again, there's lessons that can be learned in that uncomfortable realization about the truth of what happened. Even at BGA, we won 3 state championships. Every championship at BGA that I won, we went downtown underneath Chip, this Confederate statue, there to celebrate. Why did we celebrate? Because that was the thing to do. That's what we have held up high in our society. This Chip and everything he represents and fought for, this is what it's all about. This is the thing to do. And again, later on in life, you realize like, you're swept up in the celebratory events, the custom, the normalization, but there's a deeper meaning. Even my teammates, they would even wear the Hank Williams Jr. paraphernalia. If the South would have won, we would have had it made. Were they conscious or were they unconscious about what they were wearing and what it meant and represented to my people? Despite all that, we still built some strong relationships, strong enough to win championships and still strong enough to impact lives for ourselves as well as our community. But again, talking about the unconsciousness. So I went to BJ. There was an awakening that was starting with the education. But the education is so good if you can't question the education that you're receiving, because the problem I've found more and more and more is not that people are uneducated, but the problem is that they are just educated enough to believe what they've been taught and not educated enough to question what they've been taught. So I continued my awakening, going to Vanderbilt. My parents there, as John said, graduated in 3 years. I consciously made relationships with my white teammates as well as my black teammates. You know, again, having new black classmates in abundance, or what I consider to be abundant, even though it was still at a predominantly white institution, it was much more than what I had at BGA. So that was a growing in a different field for me. It was awesome, right? So after that, continuing awakening, as an athlete, you realize sometimes what people really think about you when you're not playing ball anymore. So after, as a free agent with the NFL, got released, you start to make the transition and seeing more so how what people kind of see you as sometimes, which is, you know, just a black male. You know, here I go in corporate America, as a medical device rep there. And again, corporate America is a systemic extension or remnant of white supremacy. That being said, I had some challenges there, but I overcame them, obviously. But I saw racism on a whole nother level. Is there some static? I don't know where it's coming from, but if you can mute whoever it is.
Aaron, Iris, can you hear us? Please,
Uh-oh.
Iris,
Uh-oh.
please mute yourself. Oh, okay. Now go ahead, Lamont.
Yeah, no worries. So after corporate America, I made a, conscious decision to reconnect with, my own a little bit. I needed some healing. Again, that's part of where the craving comes from for the healing there. And so this upper left-hand corner there, we made a international trip, went to Costa Rica 2005. And that was the first time going out of America. And that ceiling of systemic racism was lifted off of over our heads. And it was such a healing spirit or experience. And we all kept getting back together. But it was that bond, that commonality to kind of lick each other's wound that was so healing. It healed me so much. I was like, man, the motherland must be great. I went to Africa. I went to Kenya, 2008. Went there, saw what Africa was and what it wasn't. I saw that, the presidents that said Africa is a S-hole country it was a lie. Close that there, please, Lord, no. So it was a lie. So seeing what Africa was and what it wasn't, and the truth of that really helped me out. Again, so much so the international experience, I traveled abroad even more, ended up meeting my wife in the Dominican Republic, brought her back, go back into corporate America again to make a living for our future family. And like everybody else, I get busy and I start to rely on the influence of media. And I get lazy, if you will, stop being conscious. And I just kind of be reliant, either CNN or Fox or whichever one it is. I start critically thinking. So I started to make a conscious consideration of the other narratives just to kind of educate myself. This is a Civil War talk that I do, pro-Confederate or whatnot. And but it was the unconscious question that my wife asked me that really expanded my horizon. So she's from the Dominican Republic. She doesn't realize that a lot of people come to Franklin to learn about the Civil War. And, in doing so, they're like under a spell. They got to go to downtown to see what the statue's about. And my wife was the same way. She's like, they're reading this, they're taking it all in like a sponge. And she asked me one day, hey, do you want to take a pic with Chip? And I was like, what? I've never been asked that before. So as I'm crossing the street, I'm thinking like, I'm going to learn about slavery and what it was all about so I can educate her. I was going to talk about the American Union victory and all this and that. When I got there, it was all about these guys, the Confederates. It was like, wow. Even growing up, and I was like, they told me as I was crossing the street and I was over there, I was thinking that the statue represents all men, the Union and the Confederate. That's what they was telling us in school. So much so you can see these are Franklinites there who they still think that in 2017. Go down here, 2017, another one said, I stand, talking about Chip, the Confederate statue, I stand as a reminder of the 10,000 casualties from the Battle of Franklin, both Union and Confederate. So again, when I get there, it's nothing about that. It was about the rewriting, the lost cause narrative, which is, as you can see here, Edward Pollard, who wrote this book. It's about the lost cause. It's about a new Southern history of the war, the Confederates. So the first thing I see when I get there, the United Dollars of the Confederacy, who erected the statue, they were conscious about the allegiance that statue was going to have. And it was to our Confederate soldiers. In 1899, erected there. Let me see if I can get this pointer back going again. Yeah, in 1899, that's where it was erected there. And so, as you can see that time frame, in the 1899 there, a lot was going on. Anytime blacks started to make an advancement, history shows that there was a backlash by the white population and community at that time. In particular, lynchings were going on, the lost cause myth, as I talked about, in the KKK. So this is the climate that was going on. And so there's no doubt about what that monument was representing when you look at the time frame. Even with Plessy versus Ferguson there in 1896, right before that 1909 NAACP foundation or the founding there, that was the backlash coming up from the white population there. And so there was a conscious intention about sending a message to the black people about your place in society. And then I got there and I started reading over here. On the other side, it said heroes. And I'm thinking, like, which heroes are they talking about? And are they talking about Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Nathan Bedford Forrest, Robin Hood, General Robin Hood? Or are they talking about Obama and Michelle? That's when I started scratching my head. Then I go on, I read the other line. It says, no country ever had truer sons. I'm thinking, truer sons? Or are they traitors? You know, Article 3, Section 3 talks about the definition of treason. When you go to war against the U.S., right? And didn't General Robert E. Lee surrender? And Jefferson Davis, didn't he serve some time in prison even though he wasn't found guilty? Did they consider them truer sons, or were they traitors? I'm thinking, like, what history am I reading, right? Then the conscious Confederate cause. This cause here highlighted there, with much debate being about what the war was about. When you look up Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy at the time, he tells you in his cornerstone speech, he says, our government is founded upon the exact opposite ideas. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race is his natural and moral condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. It is upon this, as I have stated, our social fabric is firmly planted. Wow, leaving no doubt about what the cause was all about. Even William T. Thompson talks about, in his description of the stainless banner, the second iteration of the Confederate flag, he talks about, as a people, in his description of this flag here, as a people, we are fighting to maintain a heaven-ordained supremacy of the white man over the inferior or colored race. I was like, wow, this is the cause that they're talking about? This is just one side now of this monument chip. Then you go right here where it says nobler champions. Noble, what does noble mean? The synonym of it is moral, ethical, virtuous, righteous, noble. Were these guys, when you consider that cause, is that what the definition is? And then champions? Didn't he surrender? I understand there's multiple definitions of champions, but I'm old school. And champions, where I come from, means winner, you know? But if you meant fighter, if that's what you meant, then why not put it over there, right? So again, as I'm crossing the street, I'm starting to realize a few different things. First of all, neither I nor Franklinites had never taken the time to read the inscriptions. I'm also discovering that I just assumed my interpretation of what history was being shared with the public. I also assumed that, or I discovered that I had more questions than answers. One of the questions that came up was the superiority, the white lie of white supremacy. You know, I was asking, do people really even believe this? Do they think this? Well, sure enough, somebody reached out to me after reading my blog and said, hey, can we just go out for Shoney's to kind of just talk? I got to talk. She's probably about 78 or so now. And we go to Shoney's. We don't even order food. We just go straight into the conversation with 2 glasses of water. And then she says, hey, Lamont, can I share something with you? Can I share a secret? I said, sure, what is it? She says, I've never told anybody this before, but I was over at my grandfather's house one time and I picked up a red book that was underneath this chair. And I read the cover of it and I put it back because I couldn't believe what I read. And I just ran off after that. And I never told anyone. I said, what did the cover say? She said, it said, is the Negro a beast or is he made in the image of God? And I thought to myself, I said, did people really think that Negroes were beasts, like animals like that? And sure enough, after we talked and exchanged, we wanted to find out, you know, the origin of where that came from or whatnot. Here's just one explanation here.
Although we think of African Americans as human beings now, in the 18th century, there was scientific evidence that proved they were the missing link between animals and human beings.
By the 1800s, Americans could point to the research of French scientist Georges Cuvier, then considered one of the world's great minds in the field of zoology. Cuvier was fascinated with a woman from South Africa named Sarah Bartman. Known throughout England and France as the Hottentot Venus, the large woman is displayed in a traveling sideshow that describes her as a phenomenon of nature. Upon her death, Cuvier's autopsy report concludes that Bartman was a species closer to the great apes than humans.
And so when you have science that proves through evidence, through experimental research, that African people are in fact subhuman or at least inferior, it gives the contradiction of democracy and slavery some weight, because these people are not citizens. These people are not full human beings.
So I was thinking, wow, if Southerners really thought that, they must have been underneath some spell. You know, something had to be wrong. And so when you think about the symptoms of a spell, you're dizzy, turning pale, ringing ear, maybe not hearing what they're hearing, like blurry vision, they can't really see, feeling faint. Suddenly I said, man, something's got to be wrong with these Southerners. What was wrong? Then I looked up the word spell. It said a period of mental distress or disorder. I said, that sounds about right. They're in a period of mental disorder, thinking that way. Then it made me think about spelling of these words that I just got through reading. So I realized that there was another verb form definition of spell. It said to write the letters in a particular way. That's when I said, I got it. The spelling of the words on the monument is putting these people in a spell. My goodness. It's the spelling of the white lies that they wrote on the monument that has people all shook up. And I first really realized this as a high school student, my senior year. This, my dad told me this. He said, son, one day you're going to learn about white people and their lies, meaning historically, right? And he said, you'll learn the more and more you live. And sure enough, after this, my senior year yearbook, it said, Cannonball would like to make amends for an important oversight in the varsity sports section of the 1996 edition. The inadvertent omission of graduate Lamont Turner football awards, honors and awards. So my dad was just trying to say, son, this is just our history. I mean, hey, you just got to learn to kind of deal with it and just know. And sure enough, the Tennessean came out with an article talking about, here recently, when they're trying to reckon with our history, talks about Southern history textbooks have a long history of deception. Yeah, well, we knew that. Well, so I thought about, you know, white people, initially white lies, but what white lie really means, it's not about white people telling lies. It actually, there's a definition, because I Googled, I was really intrigued. How long have white people been telling lies like this? And it took me to another level. It said, hey, a white lie is a lie, small or unimportant, that's told to avoid hurting another person. I said, wow, it's making more and more sense as I dig into this. You know, because the Southerners, as you saw with the Lost Cause narrative, they were hurt. You know, they didn't want their future generations thinking about, they went to war and lost these lives over this. So we got to potentially avoid hurting not only the veterans' feelings, but the future generations' feelings. So let's just tell some white lies. For instance, the glory that they won, well, you know, I mean, a crown. If they didn't win, why do they deserve a crown? That's when I started thinking, man, were these the first original participation trophies? So again, going on to the other side, right? It said, the glorious victory. It says, would it not be a shame for us if their memory part from our land and hearts? You know, they wanted to write these white lies on the Confederate monuments to keep that spirit in their hearts and tell them that they won. The glories they won shall not wane from us. They didn't want it to go away, and that they should ever live over us again. Right there at the bottom where it talks about that. Well, I'm thinking, like, what glory are they talking about if they didn't win? Well, in researching the pictures, it's talking about glory segregation. The South will rise again. Does this look familiar? Just a few weeks ago, they're back, right? That spirit that's transferring from that monument into the hearts of future and previous generations is there. Again, going back to the concern of why I feel like we need to heal, okay? So again, but as you look at them like, hey, what are they doing? Wow, what's going on with these people? Again, they're in a spell, okay? The spelling of the lies is putting people in a spell. My goodness. Yeah, this was just a few years ago, right? You remember them, Charlottesville? They're in a spell. And by the way, they're defending a monument as well. These lies are putting people in a spell. Dylan Roof, Charleston, South Carolina. So again, we're realizing that we're not listening to the people that we say we respect, the Confederate generals. Would it not be wiser to leave open the wounds of war? You know? So, and we're not listening to Kaepernick either. But after further review, especially post-2020, everybody is like, hey, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. Everybody's on board now. Essentially, we're waking up. There's a new day for justice all over the world and in Tennessee. And even at my alma mater, you know, they're giving me credit in 2020 as a Hall of Fame inductee, Lamont Turner. It's a new day. Even here in Franklin, from my blog, they were saying, hey, digging into Lamont stuff, so moving, amazing stuff. Can't wait to keep reading. This is Taylor Lynn, Loretta Lynn's granddaughter, for those of you who are country music fans. So she's as Southern as it gets. And if she can convert and have a change of heart, as she says here at the bottom, says right there where my name starts down here, it keeps coming up here. It says, I love reading this blog by my friend Lamont Turner. I'll attach. He and I grew up at the same time and we never questioned it. Then he did. I didn't. Now I do. And it's got to go. It has to go. Others are talking, you know, hey, I have followed and read and talked with other people about Chip and the fullest story. And I was like, yes, this is better. But reading this, it's not better. It's a Band-Aid. It goes to show we think we know about history, but what we know is what we've been fed. It's up to ourselves to continue to listen, to read, listen some more, and hear what is being said. Again, hear what is being said. What did Robert E. Lee say? What did Nathan Bedford Forrest say? We got to listen. Again, all for the effort of healing. Okay, it says, but I hope I'm on the right path, and if not, I hope I'm called out. Thanks for sharing. Another one's like, wow, I wondered why I viewed the fuller story additions to the square. I wonder when I viewed the fuller story additions to the square, why I didn't feel satisfied. Thank you, Lamont Turner, for articulating why it wasn't enough. Thank you for sharing. There's a lot that can and should be done in Franklin. Again, we're talking about the momentum by the work that we all do, by erecting the truth and bringing it to attention, by questioning. Again, questioning. Over here, Taylor talks about Lamont didn't question it. Then he did. At first I didn't, but then I did. Questioning, again, is the new woke. And then, let me get this out of the way. So right here at the bottom, and this is what I really like, where she says, so glad you are putting this out there. Hearts and minds can be changed, which is the subtitle of my new book. Again, it's about converting and transforming lives, hearts, minds, and culture. So originally you recall to where I was trying to get them to bring the surface talk about the elephant in the room, Chip. Well, now, after the fact, 2 years later, they're saying, hey, it's time to confront what the Confederacy stood for. And even the African American Heritage Society is talking about in July 2020, this is all at the same time. This is a matter of the same day or a sequence of the same days right before they granted the deed over to Franklin. But they're saying, hey, we agree that as a community, Franklin can do more to tell the whole story regarding the monument. It will go a long way. Nevertheless, we can and should do more to address the Confederate monument itself, the history it tells, and the message it depicts. Confederate monument, but the story of the Confederate monument has not been fully nor accurately told, rather than being allowed to stand in silent commemoration to the lost cause. We need to place the monument in its proper historical context. That thoroughly explains the history behind its origin. Again, just by questioning continuously 2 years in our community, we're creating momentum. And that's what you all are doing at LSP. When you erect the truth about what you do, the questions that you're going to spark in your community, and the momentum that gets going, oh, you'll be surprised. You can transform lives, hearts, minds, and the culture of Memphis there too, right? So again, we talked about that. And again, ironically, they came in and started making these announcements all around about the same time, right before they settled with the UDC, and they gave it over to the UDC. And they made an agreement there. But it doesn't matter, because my thing is, if you put the truth up there, the truth will take care of itself. And so the original question about will Franklin heal, will Franklin's fuller story heal? In response to the city making a settlement agreement, this was the youth here, the students of Black Empowerment Group. They put on a protest in response to the city's decision.
My name is Mia Williamson. I'm one of the founding members of Students for Black Empowerment, the group that organized this march. Woo! Rewrite and distort history. To take a freight from a Black Franklin resident and author, Mr. Lamont Turner, we need to counter the lost cause infatuation.
Oh, it's going to show you the movement
My
that
name is
took
Mia
place.
Williamson.
Shit needs to go. 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 Shit needs to
Now, I play all that to say again, number one, it confirms the appetite for a truer story and the healing. Again, the purpose of me writing, I'm not doing it to be militant. I'm doing it because there's a sincere, urgent need for people to heal. And you'd be surprised how writing one blog or one letter or erecting one monument in your community, the movements and momentum that you will build, and the consciousness, because again, that's my primary goal, not only with you, but within my community. I'm not trying to cause chaos and be divisive. I want to elevate your consciousness the same way Martin Luther King did with the letter of the Birmingham Drill, writing to the white clergy. So again, the process of wound healing in conjunction to Robert E. Lee, his statement, why I was more in a healing mind frame. I'm a medical device sales rep by nature, right? That's where I made my living for the most of my life. And each wound has a specific wound healing phase that it goes through. It's 4 parts. But the inflammatory phase, which is the destruction and removal of bacteria, is the phase in which I feel like our society is in right now. And because I've seen the first phase of wound healing and where we kind of gone through and where we're kind of going, I'm confident that we will eventually heal. And that's why I wrote in my book, how Southern communities can heal by transforming lives, hearts, minds, and culture. This right here, it says the true South will rise and heal. So, that's why I have a healing mind frame. And I really truly believe that you saw with the spelling of the white lies and the spell that our community is under right now, our enemy was fake news with the Confederate statues, and it still is. We just saw what happened, right? When Trump won, he said, stop the steal. Look what happened. Again, those people are under spell. Like, what's going on? Fake news. That's why LSP needs to erect the truth about what happened in Memphis. That's why Tennesseans for Historical Justice needs to erect the truth about what happened. People need to know the truth. The truth is healing. It may be uncomfortable as we talk about that silence, but it's healing, right? So another reason why it's important, you know, those monuments mask white supremacy. And right now, if we didn't see a few weeks ago again, Homeland Security, the report that came out in 2018, it says that they found white supremacy is the most consistent and lethal threat to Americans, not just people of color, but to all Americans. Our whole entire government almost got upended. This is everybody's concern, right? So it's time to tell the truth, and I'll close out with this last video to encourage you to tell the truth. And I got one other slide.
All over the planet, just walking around on this one street. I mean, today we've been talking to people from Bangladesh, people from Thailand, people from Pakistan, Ecuador, all over the Afro-Caribbean region. I mean, it's an amazing opportunity.
Pretty hard, but certainly don't want to drop a
Swabbing here today is part of a much larger effort by National Geographic and IBM called the Genographic Project. The project has spent the last 4 years collecting DNA from 350,000 people around the world.
It is basically a quest to understand, you know, where we all came from. That's one of those key human questions that everybody is kind of searching for the answer to. And, you know, who am I? Who are my ancestors? And we're using the tools of science to get the answers to that.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Now, hundreds of New Yorkers are lining up to get these questions answered too, and learn about their own ancient pasts.
Well, I think we're looking for something unexpected, you know. So we sort of know where we're from, but, you know, we don't really know where we're from.
Genealogy allows most of us to trace our ancestors back about 4 or 5 generations, to great-great-grandparents perhaps.
Probably we can go as far as probably 100 years.
This is your deep, deep ancestry. So we're not necessarily your grandparents.
If we're lucky, we know where these ancestors lived. These DNA tests tell a deeper story. Rather than taking us back just a handful of generations, they take us back many thousands. No matter where we're from, how different we appear, if we look back through the generations at the roots of the human family tree, we find we are all related. We descend from a small group of Homo sapiens who began eking out a living in Africa around 200,000 years ago. People didn't leave Africa until much later, when hard times or greener pastures led them out. Our ancient connections may not be obvious to this group. Our ancestors adapted to different climates, and as a result, humans are now among the most physically varied looking species on the planet. But looks can be deceiving.
All that? Yeah. Look right here. This is great.
Light, dark, big, small, curly, straight, brown, blue. Minuscule genetic changes account for all of our differences. To track our ancient past, though, scientists study DNA that stays very much the same. In men like George Dellis, it's a Y chromosome.
All that? Let's do one more.
It's been passed down the line from father to son over thousands of generations, and ultimately traces back to one man who lived in Africa around 60,000 years ago. Call him Scientific Adam. For women like Nejla Demirci, the DNA comes from special cell structures called mitochondria, which both men and women.
Okay. So the moral of the story is, as we're erecting truth all throughout Tennessee, if we do that, you know, we'll help people come out of their spells because we'll be spelling the truth, the healing truth, and the truth will defend itself. Because like Booker T. Washington said, a lie does not become truth. Wrong does not become right, and evil does not become good just because it's accepted by a majority. The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose, and it will defend itself. So that's what I want to encourage you all to do. Continue your good work all throughout Tennessee. All Tennesseans need you so that we can bring forth healing throughout Tennessee. So that's it. I'll try to